afternoon.
I'm Natasha. I'm the city lead at Foundation Center San Francisco. I'm really looking forward to introducing our guest speaker today. We have an on-site audience as well as an online audience. So hello to all the folks on the live stream. Before we get started, I just want to let you know about upcoming programming at Foundation Center. This is the first time Foundation Center folks. Welcome to the Foundation Center, and for those of you, welcome back. We have a full library and learning center upstairs, so you can do your grant research and learn more about running nonprofits. Next week, we're hosting a special program called Getting Your House in Order, Improving Your Organization's Internal Controls. So if any of you need some more financial management freshening up, please attend that. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Andrea Spagat. She is the West Coast Region Director for StoryCenter, and she's going to be talking all about digital storytelling for your nonprofit. So please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to see you all here, because I love talking about digital storytelling. It's my work and it's my favorite topic. I'm a lucky person in that sense. I'm starting with this picture because it's just a really nice representation of people in the thick of a workshop. You see like the intense look on everyone's faces working on their stories in the middle of a creative process. I like that kind of snapshot as a representation of the work that we do. I will do a quick introduction of myself. I've been working for StoryCenter for almost 10 years. June 1st will be my 10th anniversary with StoryCenter. And I've been doing digital storytelling work for longer than that. I started here in San Francisco when I was coordinating a youth substance abuse and violence prevention program. And we were working mostly with students that were in continuation and what were called county community schools. We started a digital storytelling program there. And then, it was like 10% of my job, but it was my, 100% my favorite part of the job. So when this position came open at StoryCenter, I leapt at the opportunity. The work that I do at StoryCenter is largely focused on community health programs, and for the last 3 years, probably a good amount of time now, I've been doing a ton of work around HIV prevention and HIV stigma. And so you'll see that work represented quite a bit in the presentation that I'll make. And then the other thing is I would really love it if you all interrupted me as much as possible with questions. The way we normally work is not us in front of people behind a microphone. We're usually in groups telling stories, facilitating group process. So as much group process as we can have happen in a room like this, I'm happy with. I'm going to go through the agenda, which looks pretty packed. And I'm actually anticipating not getting through the entire agenda. I do want to leave some room at the end for questions and answers. But I did put the most important stuff at the top. I'm going to do a quick introduction to our organization and a little bit about how our work has been evolving, particularly recently, where we've been talking about the work that we do in terms of story work. And then I'll really get into what is probably the most substantive piece of the presentation, which is talking about how different people use digital storytelling and story work in general. We use kind of an outcomes model that looks at different goals and kind of layers the goals that organizations that we work with would normally have. And in general, there's kind of multiple goals to these digital storytelling projects. After that, which is usually kind of a big information dump, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we'll do a little writing prompt so you also get a little bit of a taste of what kind of personal story work we do in our workshops. And then we'll go through a few different topics that are related to this main part of the presentation. First of all, the importance of participatory media to the work that we do. I want to go over a few different types of studies that have looked at the impacts of digital storytelling. I'm going to do a quick overview of some of the theoretical underpinnings of the work that we do. A little bit, if we get this far, what kinds of stories we're talking about, an ethical framework for our practice, which is actually it could be an hour-and-a-half presentation in and of itself. We have found this ethical framework very, very useful for all kinds of personal storytelling work. We're working with the personal stories of real people, and how to do that in an ethical way is a big topic of conversation for people that are doing this kind of work. And then a little bit on distribution channels. So any questions so far about this agenda, which is really long? I realized last night as I was finishing it up. All right. So first of all, a little background on my organization. We developed this digital storytelling methodology back in 1993. We've been around for a very, very long time. It comes actually out of a tradition of theater and community arts. And we changed our name to StoryCenter. We evolved our name into StoryCenter in September. Prior to that, we were Center for Digital Storytelling for about 20 years. And prior to that, it was this 501c3 was a theater company called Life on the Water, which did community theater in San Francisco. And out of that community theater experience, the ED of that theater company and our current ED started collaborating with a performance artist named Dana Atchley. He had created these vignettes with what was, like back in 1991, 92, super cutting edge video technology called QuickTime, right? And he had special access to Apple offices in order to be able to use this, very special QuickTime technology, and created these little vignettes. And I'm going to show you an example of a digital story soon. Created a performance piece that was centered on these vignettes and got a lot of audience feedback in which the audience wanted to know how to make these vignettes for themselves, these little 2 to 3 minute personal stories that incorporated a lot of images. And so that's where Joe Lambert, my ED now, and Dana Atchley put together a workshop, and that was kind of the first digital storytelling workshop in which people developed their own personal stories. So since then, we've done, a ton of work across the globe. Center for Digital Storytelling, what was Center for Digital Storytelling, kind of coined this phrase, digital storytelling, which is now used for a lot of different kinds of media, but we continue to use it, and when we say digital storytelling, we mean first-person narratives, narratives in which people are telling their own stories. We probably teach, like 100 workshops, maybe a little under 100 workshops per year now. We have a staff of about 8 people, depending on how you count the FTEs, and work with about 40 contractors around the world. And a big part of what we do is that these workshops and the media production process is accessible. It's participatory media, and we work with anyone who comes to a workshop, and we've done plenty of work in which the people in the workshops don't read or write. We've done plenty of work where the people in the workshops have never touched a computer in their life, We adapt this story work process to all these different demographics and different situations. And the evolution of our work, and it's really, I don't know if it's the evolution of our work or really how we're framing the work we've always done. One of the reasons that we evolved the name from Center for Digital Story, a big reason we evolved the name from Center for Digital Storytelling to StoryCenter, is that digital anything is just completely redundant nowadays. Everything is digital, and so Center for Digital Storytelling really didn't mean anything anymore to most people. And because when people approached us, it was kind of putting like the digital part front and center, and when people approached us, they were mainly coming to make videos, and people still, come for us to help them make videos. And really, the reason that people work with us and people continue to work with us is because where we kind of, what makes our work special and what makes our work compelling is our ability to focus on story and to help people make emotionally compelling stories. Anybody, like video making is something that's really, really broad. Being able to facilitate a process in which the storytellers in the process make emotionally compelling stories is kind of the very specific thing that we do. And so the story work refers to kind of a broader constellation than just the digital storytelling. We often work just helping people to do story circles, to create texts, to share stories within organizations, to come up with audio pieces rather than video pieces. But it allows us to really shift the way we talk about our work to talking about the fact that we're doing this story work rather than making videos, right? Without further ado, I'm going to just show an example of what we mean by digital storytelling. This is a video that was done as part of a food justice project in Denver, and I'm just going to show it. It doesn't require a lot of introduction, and y'all can get a sense of what we mean by digital storytelling. And if all goes well, this will take me to the internet. Yes.
For school plays, Halloween parties, and playdates, I pretty much always wore the same thing. Beige tights, a green leotard, and a tutu, fringed with bald brown pantyhose filled with white stuffing. I was a potato plant, the family mascot. I grew up next door to my grandpa's potato farm, the very first organic Irish seed potato farm in Colorado. My clothes were almost always covered with straw from pushing hay bales off of the back of our truck. My fingernails were almost always crusted with fertilizer from digging up small misshapen potatoes, brown, beige, red, russet. When I was 7, we sold our farms and moved to new countries and new homes. Living in sprawling cities and suburbs, I learned that many kids know very little about where potatoes come from. Carrots were smooth and wet and ovular. They came from bags. Land was paved, mowed, built on, or abandoned. Now I work in Westwood, a Denver neighborhood many miles from my grandfather's potato farm. It's classified as a food desert. In the mornings on my drive to the office, I pass Burger King, Taco Bell, McDonald's, KFC, and Jack in the Box. They circle like vultures, surrounding the neighborhoods. Empty box stores that could house a grocery store remain vacant. Grocery carts sit abandoned. When I turn off the main roads and begin to pass the homes near our office, David waves to me from his front yard. He is surrounded by rows of chili peppers that he tends to every morning, as if they were his own family members. Irma smiles as she collects squash. David and Irma are one family of 400 families who live in Westwood and have decided to grow their own food, to start their own grocery store. When I visit the family's gardens, their kids point out ripening tomatoes and pull up lumpy, bright orange carrots from the ground. Following them as they guide me through the leaves and the plants, I smile wide. Sometimes I forget my lunch at work, and I try to go out to eat. The most accessible, inexpensive option is a bag of French fries. But that's about to change.
I grow so fast, I taste so good, I'm a little potato. I grow so fast, I taste so good, I'm a little potato.
So was the sound was kind of low on that, wasn't it? Was everyone able to hear it? Okay, all right. Would you rather have the sound a little higher on the next one? Yeah, I would. Okay. I will see what I can do about that as soon as I can catch someone. All right. So that is a digital story. It was made by a person who is not a video editor, is not a video maker. It was probably one of the first times she'd ever worked with a video editing software in her life and made something like this. And it came out of a 3-day workshop. She finished it in 3 days. And the workshop was a workshop where folks were sitting around the table and telling stories to each other, and then kind of taking the feedback they get from that process to shape the stories that were created. So are there any questions before I launched into our outcomes model? Any questions? Okay. Mm-hmm.
So what, like the flyer that went out that you decided to come to this workshop, what did that look like, generally speaking?
She was part of an organization that contracted us to teach the workshop, and so it was probably more internal communication. We do in general maybe like 20% of the work we do is our workshops that are kind of advertised to the general public. Most of the work that we do, people are kind of the people who are invited into the workshop kind of by special invitation. I don't, the flyer or whatever information she received probably was something to the effect, I didn't coordinate this particular workshop, something to the effect of come and tell your own story in your own words about this issue that means so much to you. Something like that. We have this fun outcome model of multiple parts here, but basically it's a graphic that allows us to talk about the different reasons that people would sponsor or organize a digital storytelling workshop. And I did some kind of fancy PowerPointing, more fancy than I've done in the past, so hopefully this works. But this first section on personal reflection and growth, I looked at the impacts kind of from the personal out to the most public impacts, and you can kind of largely divide the impacts of a digital storytelling workshop between what the storyteller is getting out of the workshop, kind of the effect of the workshop on the storyteller and on participating in the workshop, and then the impacts of showing the media that get produced in the workshop. So at the end of the workshop, you have a set of short videos, kind of like the one you just saw. And what is the impact and how are you using those videos that are coming out of the workshop? So on a more personal level, these first couple of outcomes are personal reflection and growth and team building. And this is actually a very, very important part of what we do. And there's always a tension in the work that we're doing. Mostly our workshops get funded by people who are interested in getting media made. You know, like normally they would do a traditional PSA, and they're getting really daring and doing a workshop, and they're trying it out, and this is kind of a pilot experience, and they want to see what it looks like to have the people that are being impacted by the issue tell their own story inside this participatory media process, right? So most of the time, the funding is like communications funding of some kind. However, there's a whole process that happens inside one of these workshops that's really important and really emphasizes people. Is composed of people making their own stories in this space that honors those stories, that's very caretaking, and that often is helping folks give voice to stories in ways that they have never voiced those stories before. And it is a very, very powerful experience for the storytellers in the workshop. In general, the closer the storytellers feel to the issues that they're giving voice to, the more powerful that experience is. And so oftentimes, even though they can't get it funded like this, the organizations that are working with us are really interested in having their clients, their constituents of different kinds, people who have really given many hours to the cause, who have given their insight to the cause, but are maybe not staff and whose stories are not necessarily seen. They're very interested in bringing groups of people together to tell their stories, to honor those stories in that way, and to give people that space that of learning and growth that happens when you get time to really reflect on your own story in a supportive way and in a creative way, because people are not only just, people aren't just telling their stories in a circle, but they're going back and they're writing their stories, they're getting feedback on their stories, they're bringing together images often to also represent their stories. And it's this really pretty intense creative process, usually done by people who don't consider themselves creative people. Most of the people that come to our workshop are like, I'm not a creative person, right? And it's a very powerful experience for them in that way. And at the same time, I'm going to show Joanna's story in a second. But at the same time, there's a really powerful team-building dynamic that is happening. If you think about it, when you sit down, we rarely get this chance, but when you do sit down and share stories, the connection, that's kind of how the deep, important connections happen between people, is you tell each other's stories. And the more intimate those stories are, the more close to your heart those stories are, the deeper the connection is with the people in the room. And so, there is often this team-building experience that happens that I'm going to talk about a little bit more after we see Joanna's story. And Natasha, I don't know if you heard that we wanted the volume up a little bit more on the stories. Yes? Okay. All right. Here, sorry. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to this story because it's a little more kind of the subject matter can be more sensitive than the previous one. It's a story that was made as one of a series of stories that have been made with the Asian and Pacific Islander Wellness Center, which is based here in San Francisco. They have a really important HIV prevention program. They do a lot of work with HIV prevention and also treating HIV. And we've had, I think, project that's gone on for about 4 years, creating stories that are part of efforts to eliminate stigma around HIV in Asian and Pacific Islander communities, but also kind of in general. And so this story was made by an HIV-positive transgender woman in a workshop. It was the first time she'd ever done any video editing, and this is the story she came up with.
Growing up, I always felt different. Even though my mother sheltered me, the rest of my family, friends, and community made sure I was well aware of my difference. I was teased for the way I walked, talked, and for my mannerisms. At the age of 14, I set out from deep East Oakland on my bicycle, not knowing where I was going or what I was looking for. By the time I hit downtown, I came onto a neighborhood where there were young guys my age that were like me. I ran away from home. We became family. We survived through prostitution, drugs, stealing, and fighting. At one point, I looked at my life and saw it was going nowhere. My mother always installed in me the importance of education. So I went back to school and became a nurse. I worked in a hospital for 20 years. I was diagnosed with HIV when I was 25. Back then, people with HIV and AIDS were still dying like flies. I called my mom on the phone and told her. She said, "I know, you're still my child." Even though my family accepted me, I still felt disappointed within myself. I continued to punish myself with drugs and alcohol. I was still in search of who I was. Unknown since the age of 5, I wanted to be a girl. But when I was 45, I had a dream I was living as a woman, working in a hospital as a nurse. I decided it was time to transition. Through time and meeting others in my community, I learned to forgive myself. I want to be an educator, advocate, and spokesperson for people with HIV, especially the new infected and transgender of color. The world doesn't make it easy for us to make a living, but I want young transgenders to realize that prostitution is not the only way. One thing that I've learned is that being Afro-American, living with HIV, and a transgender, I'm still a strong black woman. At this point in my life, I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm happy with me. I am in a strong, committed relationship. I'm the woman that I always wanted to be.
I tell the scariest parts of my story first so that people know.
There are more stories where that came from, but we're not going to watch more right now. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. All right. So before I move on, any questions about what you just saw? Or just responses? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll get to that definitely as I move along. Any other questions? Yeah?
Does she not want to be featured or being interviewed on camera, like live video?
I'm going to get to that too, actually. Good. Those are excellent questions. Okay. Oh, I need to talk into the mic too. I will get to that. Although the part of the answer is that this is what we do. We do not do stories in which people are just looking into the camera and telling their story. Partly because an important part of our process is that people develop what we call a considered text. And so everyone who tells their story gets the chance to edit their story and really be very thoughtful and careful about how they convey what they want to convey. So the normal process is that we would have a story circle, and then after the story circle, people take the feedback and actually write their story, and there's a whole editing process before the story is actually recorded, and it's an audio recording, and that allows the storyteller to be in control of all the aspects of the story. Because if it's something where we're just taping somebody tell a story, somebody has to edit that video, and it's not the storyteller. Yeah, so the editing kind of happens before the recording happens by the storyteller. But good question. Let's go back to where we were.
Sorry, I did have a question.
Sure.
So the Wellness Center, do they just like invite beneficiaries, or how is it that they recruit people to come to the workshops?
All right, so that's part of the presentation. So we watched Johanna. Oh, so thank you. So the question is, how do people get to the workshop? Does the organization invite people to the workshop? And this is actually this next thing that I wanted to talk about is this idea of team building. So Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center has a pretty significant communications project around HIV stigma reduction. And several years ago, about 4 years ago, they switched their model from doing kind of more conventional public service announcements to creating space for these workshops and having people who are being impacted by HIV stigma in a lot of different ways come in and do and participate in workshops. And it's been really interesting working with them because they have a really thoughtful, well-crafted approach to community building. And we've really been able to take this model of digital storytelling and participatory media making and apply a lot of, and have it shaped by a lot of really smart people that are really committed to community. So now, besides just being a vehicle for creating these stories, it's also a really important part of their leadership development program. They have a lot of different support groups, and actually a lot of their staff are people who have come through those support groups. So they have a lot of staff that are former clients, and that's part of their model of being able to provide services to the community that are very community-minded and very kind of responsive to the community that they're serving. There's actually, particularly around access to health care for transgender people, that's actually a really kind of a sensitive area, and it's an area in which there are many medical providers that are not providing sensitive, culturally competent care to transgender people. And part of what we're doing with these stories, and part of what Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center is doing, is educating medical providers, educating caseworkers, and also just doing a lot of on-the-ground kind of advocacy in San Francisco. So this is a really integral, this team building aspect is a really important part of the big picture for Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center. And Johanna was brought into a workshop because she had been receiving services from from Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center. She hadn't really been involved in doing kind of outreach and education yet. She was just right on the cusp of doing that. And that's really the people that get prioritized at the Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center to participate in the workshop are those people that are kind of right at a moment where they're stable enough in their lives to be able to go out and start taking care of other folks in their community and help the Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center provide this really responsive, culturally competent care. And so Joanna was identified as a person that was receiving services. She's expressed interest, like she did in her video, to be part of the outreach that Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center was doing. And she had a case manager. She was part of a transgender HIV positive support group. That there were different ways that Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center was in contact. She was with her. She was also receiving her medical care there, and that's how she was selected for the workshop. I actually had a really interesting conversation with them very recently about this idea of team building and bringing people in who are in a space in their lives where they can take care of other people. And so oftentimes that's part of how these workshops get formed and how people are invited to the workshops. It's folks for whom the process would be a personally empowering process and something that would help them on a personal level, and a process which would help them get involved and help them experiment in using their voice to tell their story as part of an effort to educate, to reduce HIV stigma, and to connect other people who can benefit from these services to the clinic. So Johanna was right there. And that's kind of, like a deeper explanation of this team building. And what happens in the workshop itself is that we're really inviting people to tell their story. And the facilitation, in terms of the people who are facilitating, it's a facilitation in which the kind of a container is created for people to be able to tell their stories to each other and provide supportive feedback to each other, both supportive emotionally, but also supportive in terms of, what is powerful about my story? What is important about my story? What resonates with you, in terms of my story, so I can make the most powerful story possible inside this workshop. And then there's kind of another piece of the work, which is what happens to these stories after they leave the workshop. And we kind of divided into these three areas: education and awareness impacts. That's kind of capacity building that's done with the stories, movement building that's done with the stories, and policy advocacy that's done with the stories. So this education and awareness piece is, there are a lot of organizations that use stories to train their personnel, to train their staff, to train their volunteers, to help people become more aware of issues that are being experienced in the different groups that we're working with whose experiences are marginalized. And to be able to use these personal stories and kind of springboard off of these personal stories. Take, for instance, Johanna's story and ask physicians or caseworkers or social workers or whoever, how can you better serve a person who is experiencing these things? What do we need to incorporate into our practice to be able to support a person that is dealing with these multiple intersecting issues in their lives? So that's kind of the capacity building component. Going back to the capacity building component, oftentimes the stories are packaged with discussion guides, and kind of curriculum is built out around the stories. to help provide that kind of educational experience. Then the next piece of it is movement building. Sometimes movement building looks a lot like education and awareness. You're showing the stories, you're discussing the issues that are embedded in the stories. But the movement building, the goal around movement building is pushing forward different kinds of policy changes and institutional changes. So you're working with groups of people. You want to get people on the same page around an issue. You want people to have a space in which they can articulate their own experiences with those issues and come together and contribute to different kinds of societal changes. And then the policy advocacy piece is a little bit different than that, in that the stories are being shown directly to key decision makers. And I wanted to show, I hope this works here, Johanna's press conference after she did the workshop, which was really cool that it got videotaped. But so Johanna did this story probably last February, and I think this press conference took place like November of 2015. And I'll just show it to you, I think is what I'm going to do.
Projects of national significance are helping some of the city's most vulnerable residents achieve health and wellness. We believe in long-term committed collaborations and effective public health strategies that really rely on and must engage community institutions and resources, like what API Wellness Center and the San Francisco Department of Public Health are doing together. This is a core element of our overall approach here in the city. It contributes to our overall success, and it really allows us to vision and to say that we will end this epidemic and we will get to zero. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a press conference to announce a citywide initiative to get HIV infection stigma, and there's a third component of that to zero. All right, and so and Johanna participated in this press conference with Mayor Ed Lee in getting the word out about this initiative.
And it's my great pleasure to introduce Johanna Brown, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Melody. In 1988, I was diagnosed with HIV. By 1995, I found out that I was living with AIDS. At the time, I was working as a nurse. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. I got on drugs real heavy, lost my self-esteem, got disconnected from my family. By 2011, I moved to San Francisco. I joined API. There I met my doctor, my case manager, my therapist. We worked on my self-esteem. They helped me find housing. They helped me get back to work. I'm working again as a nurse. I'm working in the community as an outreach worker. The good part about API is that they open trans access. And that's a program for transgenders. And there, we as girls get to come together. We get to socialize within ourselves. But we get to learn about our disease. We get to learn who we are in this community, living with HIV and AIDS. We get to support each other. We don't have to be worried about being stigmatized, being judged, being people pointing fingers at us. So we live, kind of a healthier life. We build upon ourselves. We go back out into our community stronger and with strength, and we get to find jobs, apartments, and housing. Now today, my viral loads are undetectable. I have a T-cell count over.
You get the idea. I mean, she's almost done there. But basically, this was one of the outcomes of the workshop, or one of the things that the workshop helps support, is that there's a new articulate advocate for quality transgender healthcare in San Francisco that is able to tell her story, to support her sisters, and also to help get policy changed and help this initiative to get HIV to zero. It was really fun when this happened too, because we were actually we were facilitating the next workshop when this press conference took place, so we got to celebrate it a little bit. Let's get back to the presentation. And then there's another component here, which is a little bit of a, it doesn't fit neatly into the personal transformation or the policy or the story impact piece, which is research and evaluation. But I did want to talk about it because it's it's a relatively substantial thing that's happening, in which stories are being used inside research projects, both as a way of kind of collecting data. So the stories and the narratives that are created are looked at as data, as like a conversation in a focus group would be looked at as data. And at the same time, they're being used to help communicate results of different kinds of research studies, and that's happening mostly in academia around the United States and really internationally also. But we do collaborate with academics who are engaging in digital storytelling in this way. Yeah.
So, have you seen a component, or is there a vision component that could incorporate many of these, but also has an element of outreach to try to engage people to take advantage of a program or a service? Describe as social marketing kind of.
Yeah, no, I mean, nearly a lot of the work that we do has that component, and I think maybe we would talk about it as education and awareness. I probably didn't articulate that, but definitely kind of part of what API Wellness Center is doing, and many organizations that we're working with, is that the stories are part of the way that they're connecting with people that might find their services useful. So, when people come into groups, when people are doing kind of maybe even outreach one-on-one and just starting to engage with clients, sometimes the stories are used. They work a little bit, I think the strengths of these digital stories are in strategies that are more focused on community engagement. So I think oftentimes the model in which traditional public service announcements are created are kind of like these big social marketing campaigns, like, the campaigns that helped get smoking levels down in California, or kind of the big well-known campaigns, and those do have a place in those big social norm changing kinds of strategies. The stories are much more effective when there is a model in which community engagement is really important, partly because the organizations that are working in this space are very interested in having people who are impacted by the issues also become much more involved in pushing forward different policies and institutional changes also that are important for kind of that type of social change, whether it's HIV prevention or it's, we've also done in that space a lot of work with foster youth and looking at different laws that impact foster youth, and stories have been created in that space. Initially, we haven't done as much work lately, but initially kind of this model of trauma-based storytelling that's not all nonprofits use, so but it is very much a big part of the work I do, was developed around domestic violence prevention efforts, where survivors of domestic violence were coming in and telling their stories for education and justice. And we have a whole program, Silence Speaks, that's part of StoryCenter that kind of pioneered and led that model of doing storytelling.
Is there sometimes tension between like the communication department's agenda and the people's personal story?
So the question is, thank you, is there tension between the communications department agenda and the people's personal stories? Once the communication department comes on board, no. But I think there's often a lot of resistance from the communication department. Usually organizations are basically unwilling to contract us before they really fully believe, because it's not super cheap. It's not like they're paying $500 to see how this works, right? So by the time we're working with them, people are on board and understand how the stories are going to fit into their communication strategies. And to get really effective, emotionally compelling stories, you can't convene a workshop and say this is what the message has to be. And that obviously makes a lot of communications departments really nervous. They're like, what do you mean they're not going to be on message, right? And what actually ends up happening is you get, usually 7 or 8 really deep stories that contain the messages that the communication department wants and more, because they're much more nuanced than the bullet-pointed communications messages that are usually being used. And in addition, there's a whole kind of leadership development process that's happening among the storytellers. But definitely, communications departments look askance until they kind of understand that bigger picture. And usually when we work with an organization, it's because there is someone who really believes in the work that is helping to convince other folks that this is a really important way to do the work.
And sorry, one more question that gets a little more specific about that. So then, given that flux between the two and these very personal messages, have you seen, or would you ever suggest that this is packaged then together, where there might be a piece at the end that says, we're in your community on Monday and Wednesday at these hours, come here, go to this place to sign up, do these things, or is that separate?
No, absolutely. So the question is, how do you package these stories? Like, can you have a story and then package it with additional information about this is where the services can be provided? And nearly all of the stories that we create are packaged in one way or another. And I think, kind of once that initial kind of thing about being really nervous about the message gets, you go through that, then folks realize that actually having these vignettes are really powerful because you can package it in a lot of different ways. So you can have, Johanna's story, for instance, and you can package it around messages of policy advocacy and, look how important it is to do personal leadership development. You can also package it around messages of healthcare access. Look how important it is to make sure that people have access to healthcare. You can also use her story for provider trainings. You can use it in a number of different ways, depending on what we call the contextualizing information. So depending on how those stories are contextualized and framed, they can be used in a number of different ways. Yes?
Who owns these stories once they're put on YouTube, so to speak?
Good question. Who owns the stories once they're put on YouTube? The first part of the question is that usually the organization we're working with or the funder owns the story, depending on kind of how the funding is coming down the pike, right? It's almost always the organization we're working with. So Asian Pacific Islander Wellness Center owns the story. We're not really going to have time to get into this, but this is actually an issue that our framework for ethical practice addresses, like, very much head on. We really try to get organizations on board with something other than the standard media release of, you're signing your story over completely to us. And almost all the organizations that we work with have an agreement with the storyteller that if at any time you want to withdraw your story, just let us know, and we'll withdraw it to the extent possible. Obviously, if it's been out on the internet, it's, you can take it off of YouTube, but it's not, it's out there. Or if it's on DVDs because it's part of some curriculum. But to the extent possible, there's a big effort to really respect the agency of the storyteller, not just during the workshop, but ongoing. And we even have a release form for the stories that we use as a sample release form, where people can check off different ways in which they want the story to be used. So, like for trainings and capacity buildings, or on YouTube, or for specific campaigns, or whatever it is. And as much as possible, we try to facilitate that with the organizations that we're working with. And really, very, very rarely do stories get withdrawn, and usually it's because of safety issues that a story would get withdrawn, which, everyone's super happy to comply with those kinds of things. But a big part of it is that as you're inviting people into a workshop, you're not just inviting them to tell their story, you're inviting them to collaborate on a whole big vision. There's a vision, there are these goals that the organization has, that, we're inviting people like Johanna to end HIV, to end HIV in San Francisco. And that kind of collaboration with clients and constituents and collaboration is really important for the work. All right, so I'm going to just go through, now that we've been talking about this workshop a lot, the typical workshop agenda to give you a little bit of a visual, and then we're going to go into doing some hands-on stuff, and then it might be 3:30 and it's time to end. But so this is just a typical workshop agenda. The broad strokes are in the first day, we're helping people identify their story. We do the story circle, which is really the heart of the workshop and the part that pulls people together, and then support people through an individual script writing. Day 2 and 3 is where the production elements come in much. There's a much bigger technical component in both those days, and we record the voiceovers, we record the scripts, and depending on how we're doing the video production, we show people how to use the video editing software, or sometimes there's a process in which more, the facilitators might be doing a lot more of the hands-on work and being directed by the storytellers. And by the end of the third day, we finish rough cuts of the stories. So, what you saw of Johanna's stories, there were a few little things that we changed, but the voiceover is the same, the images are the same. There's a couple transitions that we tweaked. There were some audio levels that we tweaked, but really what exists at the end of the third day is the story. There's not a huge amount of post-production. So, are you ready to change gears a little bit? Yes, the question.
What's the time commitment per day?
8-hour days. I mean, we adapt workshop times as much as we can, but kind of to get the really rich experience of sharing with a group of people and building those bonds, it's really helpful to devote as much time as possible. So our standard workshop is 3 8-hour days. Sometimes we do a little bit longer if there's a lot of trauma involved in the stories and we want to give people a little more processing time.
I'm just asking because from a nonprofit organizational ground worker, usually these tasks are given to us for 30 minutes on Thursday, start digital story, and then revisit that for a couple of weeks. Context that we gather is really generic, and it's not really strict, focusing on building upon the previous session or what. So I think times like this, it's really important to be able to, as a worker, to talk to my higher ups and be like, hey, look at these folks, they do it for 8 hours.
Yeah,
what they're producing.
you might want to look at the ethical framework. That's been really helpful for people that are in your position, because it talks about the importance of supporting the storyteller and honoring the storyteller, and that just takes time. Yeah.
Ballpark on cost?
Oh. So for us, a standard 3-day workshop where we're providing 2 facilitators, depending on like the amount of support we need to give people. Sometimes it's 6 people in the workshop. Sometimes it's 10 people in the workshop. It's $9,000. Yeah, and that's our standard rate. And we work with people, but that's more or less where we're sustainable. All right, so I want to give you a chance to do a little bit of writing. We're not going to have a huge amount of time, but let's do a little bit of writing. So it's a good time to get out of something you can write with. It's actually, for a lot of people, easier to do this pencil and paper rather than on your phone or, on your device. But do what you need to do. I have some paper in my bag if you need it, so let me know if you need it. And I'll give you the writing prompt. It says 10 minutes. I'm going to give you 8 minutes for the writing prompt, just because we're running short on time until 10 after the hour, based on that clock. But the writing prompts, you get to choose. If you have something else you really want to write about, feel free to write about something else. But a moment in which you knew you were in the right field. Oh, and that is a big old typo there, isn't it? K-N-E-W, knew you were in the right field for you. The second one is a moment in which you understood you had crossed a boundary or a border. And a moment in which you had an important conversation across a table. 3 entirely different prompts. You can choose and do some quick writing around it. So how did that feel? Transition out. So normally I would want to have you do, small story circles. We don't have time today. I think it would be a little insane to try to pack that in today. But the guidelines for a story circle are more complicated than this. But these are the instructions I wanted to give you to just listen to the story in your pairs or with the three people that you're sitting with, and respond with what each person finds powerful about the story they're hearing. But I wanted to kind of tie things up by having a couple of people read their story for the group. So does anyone have something that they would like to share with the group in general? Brave souls that you are.
Story?
Yeah, this is the story that you wrote?
Sure, I'll do it.
Awesome.
So I wrote, in September of 2011, I was ready to begin graduate school.
Yeah, there's a whole group of, I was just texted by one of the members of the live stream audience, actually.
So in September of 2011, I was ready to begin graduate school. My tuition was all squared away, excuse me, and classes were to begin soon. One morning, I received a phone call from my previous employer asking if I would reconsider returning to work. I immediately replied yes and began disenrolling from graduate school. The feeling of being appreciated and asked for by name by the community that I worked so hard to uplift and to empower was all I needed to reconsider my decision. And that's where I stopped.
Thank you. And so, in a workshop, in a story circle, this would be the moment in a workshop, in a story circle, this would be the moment to give feedback, and I would normally ask not me, but other people in the story circle to give feedback. But just one of the things I noticed about, I felt like the heart of your story was this connection with community, and kind of this idea of not going to grad school because of the connection to community was really powerful. So anyway, so that's part of the feedback I would give. And then the other part of the feedback might be, like if it were my story, maybe I would want to put in more information, kind of more historical information, to give more context to that phone call, to understand more deeply like how you're connected with community. That's like one of the questions that came up for me as I was listening to your story. So that's the kind of feedback we would give in a story circle to help each person that's part of the story circle feel deeply listened to. That we took a moment and only focused on that story. And also to help you get some ideas about how you would go from that to a 300-word script that you would record. Because usually the person that's in that circle wants to make the most compelling story possible. And so they want the feedback. People want to understand what is good about their story, and that's what we focus on. So thank you very much. Yes?
So I have a question. So regarding a group, so in that video or in that clip there's a lot of people in that thing. So out of those people, say this was an organization, right? Out of those people, how many would actually make digital stories?
So the question is, there's this visual here that's a good example of a story circle, and out of a group like this is a lot of people. How many people would actually make stories? All of them would. Yeah, and all of them make a full story like in the 3 days. We make sure we staff the workshops for that to happen. Sometimes if it's a group where, like we're doing a lot of translation, there's multiple languages, the group would not be that big, right? We might have 5 people in the group. If people also, if computer literacy levels were a little lower, and the facilitators just need to give more support to each person, and then the group wouldn't be that big. But a standard workshop is 2 facilitators and 10 stories. Other questions? Okay. So that I wanted to give a little bit of a flavor for that. Yeah, the bonus question in terms of your writing, one of the things to kind of think about your story a little bit more is how would the story change depending on who you're telling the story to. So one writing device that we'll often offer people is think about a specific person you're telling the story to, right? And telling this personal story to your mom, the way you would tell it to your mom is probably different than the way you would tell it to a mentor, or the way you would tell it to your son or daughter or niece or nephew. So that's kind of helpful in thinking about different ways to pitch the story and different ways of framing what you're saying, and different ways of making it emotionally compelling too. So in terms of the value of participatory media, I think I've kind of definitely made my case around participatory media right now, so you don't need a huge amount of case making still. But like I said earlier, it is definitely one of the challenges. I think like one of the very current challenges in our work is developing language and developing arguments to help people understand how participatory media can be a really powerful tool in their work, along with beautiful stories, right? That can be used for communications purposes. But this participatory media piece is also a really vital part in the experience that people have when they're doing digital storytelling. And there's the benefits of the media making for the storyteller. We've gone through that. There is the aspect of galvanizing leadership through this caretaking and solidarity building that happens in a workshop. The small group work actually also impacts the quality of the stories. So the stories that are coming out of our workshops are more powerful because people are part of this small group experience and this workshop experience, and they're cared for and it's a safe place. And the different ways to make the story as dynamic as possible can be explored in a space like that. And then obviously there is this delicate balance of attending to and honoring the storytellers, and also making the media products and making high quality media products that are useful for an organization, because in the end everyone wants those media products to be useful for the organization that's organizing the workshop. A few very quickly, how do we know that digital storytelling is having an impact? And I obviously wrote that kind of late at night too, an impact. So there's some small scale. There's not a lot of studies on this. There are more and more studies assessing the impact of digital storytelling, but obviously there's the impact on the storytellers of participating in workshops. We have a pretty a longish-term collaboration with the university, with a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Lynn Gubrium. She's in the public health department, I think. She has been using digital storytelling and publishing about the use of digital storytelling quite a bit, and we've been facilitating workshops for her. But one of the things that's kind of being worked on right now is she's actually building and evaluating and kind of generating a measure for assessing the impact of the storytelling experience on the storytellers. And so it'll be a kind of a validated measure for understanding how the workshop has impacted the storyteller. And hopefully that can be, useful in many different environments. And then there are various studies that look at the impact of watching the stories on the audience. And that's obviously a pretty complicated kind of dynamic to assess because, even if you're looking at the issue of HIV stigma in the Asian and Pacific Island community, how do you say that watching a story has impacted HIV stigma versus other things that are happening in the community that have impacted HIV stigma? So in some ways, it's a very complicated thing to measure. There are different kind of more focused studies that are happening where digital stories are part of an intervention. And for instance, at the Mayo Clinic, we've created a series of stories about diabetes control, and they're being used by physicians when they meet with patients. And there is a control group also. So there's a group of patients that are receiving the intervention, watching the stories, and then a group of patients who are not receiving the intervention, and they're looking at the results of long-term diabetes control in both the groups and comparing them. So there are things like that happening. And like I said earlier, also using digital storytelling as a data source and as a way of collecting information about an issue that is being studied. I'm going to end by showing this one last story and then take maybe a couple of questions after this. But this is a story that was made here in the Bay Area in Alameda County as part of an intervention that is being developed by a Kaiser Cal School of Public Health partnership to encourage African American people in faith communities to use a specific kind of colon cancer screening. So a series, we did a workshop. There were 4 stories that were made in this workshop. And I'm going to show you one of the stories that was made called Make Some Lemonade. There's also a link here to a story in the Chronicle about this intervention. But let's watch this story that was made by, he's a pastor at a church in Hayward, I think.
I am a minister and the pastor of a church for the last 29 years. On Mondays, I always call my mother, who lived in New Bern, North Carolina, and we would talk about Sunday service and other church matters. My mother was well read. She was living way back in the country, but she read the newspaper from front to back. She really enjoyed discussing political matters. She advised me on many things, and I always found her advice very helpful. My mom was really a city girl, but her second marriage was to a country man whose home was way back in the backwoods. We had no electricity or running water until 1961. At that time, my mother wrote a letter to President Kennedy explaining our situation. The power companies said there would never be any profit for them to bring electricity to us. However, within 2 weeks after my mom's letter, they were bringing power to us. My mom used to complain about being constipated a lot. She would take X-Lax to solve her problem. She was finally diagnosed with colon cancer. Her sister had died 15 years earlier with the same type of cancer. When her cancer was discovered, it was in the final stage. She died within 6 weeks. Who was I going to speak to now on Mondays about church problems? I remember once I told her about a woman in my church who was always giving me a difficult time. She said, "You've got a lemon in your church. Make some lemonade." If only she had been screened, her cancer could have been discovered sooner, causing her to live perhaps several years longer. I still sometimes reach for the phone on Monday mornings. Well, since her death in 2007, I have been screened twice. I want to be here as long as I can for my children and my grandchildren and my wife.
All right. Questions about that or responses? Let's see if there's a question about that video, and then we'll take the question from the live stream. Anything, any response to this? Yes.
Mine's not so much a question, more of a comment about how brilliant I think it finally is for a large conglomerate like Kaiser and you said Berkeley School of Medicine as well.
School of Public Health,
yeah.
yeah.
Right, doing a collaboration where finally understanding that if a community member who looks like you and comes from your similar background is telling you this or is giving you information, members of that same community are more likely to receive that information and take it as truth. So I think that's a good direction in which larger organizations are moving towards, and understanding that there are definitely boundaries across cultures, and this makes things relative to a lot more individuals of that community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you.
So from the live stream, somebody asked, how do you deal with confidentiality in storytelling for an agency that is bound by confidentiality?
Yeah, like HIPAA. Okay, so the question is, how do you deal with confidentiality in storytelling by an organization that's bound by confidentiality, kind of, I'm assuming it's probably HIPAA laws, which is kind of a lot of healthcare organizations are bound by some really strict privacy laws. And there are a lot of different ways of doing it. One is that we often help people make stories that are anonymous. So they tell the story. We're not hiding their voice, but we don't put any pictures of the person in the story. And usually I do show a story where the storyteller is anonymous. I didn't this time, but kind of like from Johanna's story, maybe you can imagine how that could have been an anonymous story. We wouldn't have necessarily needed to see a picture of her face in order to kind of understand fully what she was saying with her story. And so that's usually how we do it, but it is really important to be really clear about what level of anonymity is needed in the stories from the very beginning. It's usually a question we deal with at the very beginning of project planning. Also because we want to be really clear with the storytellers that are coming in, if there are issues around, if we are requiring them to be confidential, because you can't say, yeah, come in and tell a story in your own words about this issue, your own story in your own words, and then it's like pulling the rug out from under people if they're expecting to be able to put pictures of themselves in there, and then that doesn't happen. So it's important to be super transparent about those things from the very beginning of a project. But we do often do stories that are confidential. You. Sorry, you. Yeah, no, you.
Okay, well, I actually have two questions. So one is, I would think that there'd be sort of mixed opinions about confidentiality because, I'm a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're my client, I can't breach your confidentiality, but you can do what you want with your story. So I would think that there's two different opinions. But my other question is, what's the technology that you guys use in the workshop?
Yes, there are a lot of different kind of issues around people telling their own stories. Unfortunately, when organizations are bound by HIPAA laws, oftentimes, I think this is probably just a legal opinion. There's a lot of risk in having people not maintain their own privacy. And it's a huge contradiction when you're especially doing anti-stigma work and then telling people that they can't put their name on a story that's supposed to be addressing stigma. But anyway, that's a big thing. In terms of the technology, we use whatever seems most appropriate. And we use a lot of different technology. We use all kinds of video editing software. Lately, we've been using a cloud-based video editing platform because it's cross-platform. Anybody can bring in their computer and use. It's called WeVideo, WeVideo. And, it's not a professional level video editor, but it's actually pretty good for what it is. And most all professional video editors have said the same thing that use it. It's very good for what it is. Sometimes we use iMovie. Oftentimes we use our very old versions of Final Cut Express, which, they stopped making Final Cut Express, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. But it's still really useful for us. So, it depends what's appropriate. If we're traveling and doing workshops, sometimes whatever's available in the lab that we're using wherever we're traveling to. Did I see another hand somewhere? Sorry. Yes.
My other question was, so earlier you talked about in some of like the frameworks or what?
Mm-hmm.
The ethical framework about providing the storyteller to do the editing. Is that also in conjunction with like the imagery that's used, or is that more for like the team?
We have storytellers do as much as possible. So let me see. That's the ethical framework slide. We have storytellers do as much as possible. And for the most part, if people use a computer, and they do everything. We teach them how to use WeVideo or whatever video editor it is. And we teach a very narrow range of tools, just like the tools in that video editing software that people need to complete this. And we've kind of got that down to a science. We keep it as simple as possible, but also try to give people as many choices as possible and options as possible. So if that is possible, we teach people how to use the video editing software, and they do it. We also, inside the workshop, give a few ideas about visual design. That's kind of part of a framework that we use to help people think about the production of their story, especially people who have never produced video at all. Oftentimes the narrative piece is harder in the sense that people have more skills to do the narrative. People are used to writing. They have some experience writing for the most part. And so people spend a lot of time using those skills to create a narrative that they're really happy with. With the visual narrative piece, we often have folks in the room that have never put together visual narrative and don't, have really never done any kind of visual design. And so we try to support them as much as possible in creating the visual design and giving them ideas and options for how they could, how they can create a piece that is visually compelling as well as like the voiceover being compelling. All right, so it is 3:35. Thank you all very, very much for attending. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to put my email up. Email is the best way of getting a hold of me. And I hope you have a lovely afternoon.